Hi, I'm Dana, and I'm finally feeling alive enough to do a video I have to put thought into. So today I wanted to talk about the language that's used surrounding autism, because for me I felt like it was one of the biggest barriers against accessing the community and being able to speak to other autistic people, because I didn't know what to search, and when I did find tweets from other autistic people, I didn't know what they were saying. But I feel like it can also be a barrier to like parents of autistic children and people that are just trying to learn more about autism, because you don't know what's being said. There's a whole language there, and especially if you're trying to have discussions, it can be difficult to know what language to use to not offend people or end up getting cancelled or whatever else. So I thought today I'd take some time to explain the language to you. As always, this is just my opinion. This is how I feel. These are the things I think. It's not how every autistic person's gonna feel. I'm not a spokesperson of any kind for the autistic community. This is just me. So starting with the very, very basics, I am autistic. I do not have autism. I do not live with autism. I am not on the autistic spectrum. I mean, technically I am, but I would prefer to be called autistic because that's what I am. I had this discussion with someone on Reddit recently, and their whole argument was, oh, but like I wouldn't say that my friend that has cancer is my cancerous friend. And like, yeah, of course you wouldn't, because cancer's a horrible thing. Autism's just a thing, in the same way that I'm gay, in the same way that I'm a woman, sorry, my cats are going wild, but in the same way that I'm a cat owner, you know, it's just part of what I am. I'm autistic. But other people in the autism community may well prefer you to say that they have autism, or they may prefer to say that they themselves have autism, and that's up to them. I am not at any point going to try and speak over another autistic person or someone who has autism. Like, it's not something I would say, but if that's what they prefer, good for them, go with that for them. Quite often though, when there's discussion around autism, it comes down to neurodivergencies as a whole. And that's a big word, isn't it? I was very like, shit, like I'm pretty sure neuro means something with your brain, but there's a lot of different endings to this. So, this may not be 100% right, but from my understanding, we all have a neurotype. For me, my neurotype is being autistic. For others, their neurodivergency, the thing that makes their brain different to the average or general brain, ADHD, bipolar, things like that, all count as neurodivergencies. And if you have one of those or are one of those things, then you're neurodivergent. On the whole, the society we live in is neurodiverse because it's a mixture of people who are neurodivergent and neurotypical. Neurotypical are the people that don't have autism or ADHD or anything else like that going on. They're the perfect standard brain, essentially. Some people also refer to neurotypicals when speaking specifically about autism as allistics instead of autistics, and that's the difference there. Took me a while to figure that one out. And quite often, especially on Twitter, they use NT, like the initials NT, to stand for neurotypical, because it's a long word and you don't get many characters on Twitter. But again, it took me a little while to figure that one out. I'm sure there's probably a bunch of different language when it comes to other neurodivergencies like ADHD, but I don't know them. I'm not a part of that community. But I am autistic, so I want to go into those ones, because not everyone just says they're autistic or has autism. Some people will tell you that they have Asperger's. Some people will tell you that they have ASD. Some people will say that they're on the spectrum. Obviously, none of these are incorrect when coming from someone who has lived experience of that thing. A neurotypical saying that I have autism is something I'm going to speak up against. Another autistic person saying that they have autism, all chill. So the other main terms that are used when talking about autism and being autistic are ASD, which is shortened for autism spectrum disorder, which is what I was officially diagnosed with. I was told though that if it was still in use, I would have been diagnosed as having Asperger's. Now, there's quite a few issues with Asperger's, and I guess we're going to have to get into them. Now, ASD there's not really an issue with because it is the official diagnosis term, so although I wouldn't personally tell people I have autism spectrum disorder, I'm just autistic, it is a valid and perfectly fine term to use, you know. Whereas with Asperger's, the word comes from Hans Asperger's, I believe. Again, just my opinion and things I've read online, I'm not an expert and I have a rubbish memory. However, I believe it came from a man called Hans Asperger, who was a Nazi. Already not sounding great, it's already not a term that I would want to have associated with myself because the dude was a Nazi. I'm not going to go on about horrible things he did because it's self-explanatory from the fact that he's a Nazi. However, the other side of that, and this may be a little controversial, but from my experience, the people who claim to still have Asperger's quite often tend to be people that are saying that because they don't want to be associated with autism or being autistic. They tend, in my experience, to very much see themselves as being above the rest of us because they have Asperger's, and that's high functioning, and they're like so much smarter than everyone else. They have such a high IQ, you know, and it's Asperger's, not autism, because like autistic people are just idiots, you know. And it just, there's a lot of like superiority there to me. I've stumbled across a lot of misogyny from those types. And you know, it won't be all of them. There's going to be plenty of people out there that were just diagnosed with Asperger's and stick with it for that exclusive reason. But in my experience, a lot of them are real shitty. But that brings us to high and low functioning. They're terms that you see get thrown around a lot. And they're entirely necessary in some ways. However, there's been a lot of discussion, and what I agree with is that they make it sound like you either have the bad autism where you're low functioning and you need extra help, or you have the good autism where you're high functioning and you just get through life and you're completely fine. And I don't honestly think that's the case for any autistic person. I would be considered high functioning, but there's still lots of areas in my life where I'm really struggling or I really need help. You know, it's not a magic place of autism where I'm just completely fine because I'm high functioning. And in the same way, someone who's low functioning in these like considered terms doesn't mean they're some idiot that can't do anything. It just means they may need a little extra assistance. So for a lot of people, myself included, we've been switching to saying high or low support needs, which is what it really means anyway. And it means that people who are high functioning because they have a high IQ, which is already a thing, but you know, the people that are high functioning and we can mask and appear to be relatively normal to the general population, doesn't mean we have low support needs all the time. And vice versa as well, people who perhaps have selective mutism and are more apparently and obviously autistic may not need as much help as you'd expect. It's very interchangeable and personal and situational, and I just think that going with high and low functioning adds too much of a judgment on how the person is valued in society, I guess. I don't like it. Finally, I want to run through a couple of terms, and some of these are ones that I either have or will be making full videos about, so it's going to be very much condensed and just the most minimal explanation possible. So, masking. You see people talk about masking a lot, because essentially autistic people, we have a lot of autistic traits. That's why we're autistic. However, a lot of the time society isn't really prepared to allow us or deal with us or be nice to us for having these traits. And so you learn to put on a mask. That's your neurotypical acceptable self, essentially. You're burying your autistic self or neurodivergent self, and you're putting on a mask to pretend to be normal. For a lot of us, it's very difficult not to do. It can really prevent us from gaining the help that we need. It can stop us from getting support, and it's very, very difficult to deal with because everyone thinks that you're fine. Everyone thinks you're doing well, and it sucks. So that's why we talk about it a lot. Stimming also gets thrown around a lot. That's self-regulatory movement, essentially. So things like doing this, you'll see a lot. Hand flapping's a stim. Dancing can be a stim. Jumping can be a stim. And for autistic people, when there's so much going on all the time in the world around us and in our own heads, and there's just a lot happening, it can be really useful to just calm yourself down and keep yourself regulated. And for a lot of people, it can be not quite unwillingly done, but you don't necessarily notice it's happening. Rocking's another really common one that you'll probably have seen a lot in movies and things if you've watched ones with autistic characters. And yeah, it's quite accurate. That's one of the few things they hit. Not every autistic person stims, and not every person that stims is autistic, but it tends to be a trait that a lot of us have, so it does get spoken about a lot. And we tend to stim because of sensory issues, and to the general population, sensory issues sounds a bit nondescript, like what the hell is that? Essentially, our brains are a little bit different, so things that you can just deal with are sensory issues to us. Things like when you're trying to work and there's a dog barking, so you just blank it out, you just ignore it. I can't. When you go into a club and the music's way too loud, but a few minutes later you've gotten used to it and you're used to the lights and it's all okay. I don't get used to it. It stays that initial level of like, oh my God, the entire time, and it's a sensory issue. Sensory issues can extend to clothing. It can be why we choose to dress the way that we do. They extend to food more often than not. It's all everywhere. Sensory issues all of the time. A lot of things are just much more intense to us than they are to a neurotypical person. And that's fine, but it can be hard to cope with. And it's really important to be able to recognise what sensory issues you have if you're autistic. And it's really nice if you know someone that's autistic to figure out what their sensory issues are and try and help avoid them when you can. Because when you've got too many sensory issues, it quite often leads to a meltdown. Now, I think to a lot of neurotypical people, like, I feel really a lot of shame when I talk about the meltdowns that I've had or when I have meltdowns, because I think to the general person, it looks like a temper tantrum. It looks like a temper tantrum. Something's gone wrong or you didn't get your own way, and now you're crying and screaming and hitting yourself. Now, not every autistic person has meltdowns like that. Some of us don't have them at all. Some of us have them very, very rarely. Some people will have them a lot, and that's really difficult. But it's not a temper tantrum. It's not just, I didn't get what I want, so now I'm kicking off. There's so much going on and there's so many sensory issues, and I was probably pinning a lot of hope and necessary need onto this part of my day or part of my routine or whatever else it is that's gone wrong or not gone to plan, and it's gone wrong. And that means that my entire day, if not my entire life, is hurtling out of position and out of kilter and everything's gone wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with me then having a meltdown, because it's kind of a lot to deal with. And meltdowns are a lot to deal with as well. They take recovery time. They take having people around you or things around you or coping mechanisms to be able to deal with the actual thing itself. And like I say, there's a lot of shame around it because it does essentially look like a temper tantrum if you're not in on what it is. For me personally though, much more common than meltdowns is selective mutism. I've only recently realised that that's what I get. I thought I was just anxious, but it's very much like, it is a part that's connected to my anxiety for sure, but I just have times when I'm very, very overwhelmed and I can't talk. Like, the words are there, I'm thinking, there's things that I would like to say. I can't make them come out. It just doesn't happen. They're right there in the back of my throat and my mouth's moving, but nothing will come out. Because I'm so overwhelmed and anxious and whatever else in the situation that it just doesn't work. None of it works. All of my energy's gone on to, like, not just having a meltdown from how overwhelmed I am. And that means that I just don't have the energy or the power or the strength or the, like, emotional energy to be able to form a sentence and get it out. It just doesn't work. And this is another one that, like, not every autistic person experiences, and not every person that experiences it is autistic. But it's reasonably common, and I feel like it gets spoken about enough that you will have seen it floating around and may not be aware of what it was. And the final term I want to talk about is burnout, because I feel like burnout's quite a difficult term in the community, because obviously everyone can experience burnout. Everyone gets burnt out at some point when you're working really hard, or you're going to school and studying hard, or you're looking after a family that's taking a lot of effort, you know, whatever it is. Anyone can experience burnout and probably will at some point. But burnout for autistic people isn't quite the same thing. Like, it's not that it's better or worse, it's that it's literally we're using the same term for something that's realistically a different thing. Like, although it stems from the same place of, like, you're doing too much, for autistic people it can be from doing a lot less, which leads to a lot of, like, shame and judgment, because, like, oh, well, other people can do 3 times the amount of whatever you're doing, so how come you're not getting burnt out just from doing that? But it also takes us a lot longer to recover, and we can tend to be in the burnout period for a lot longer, and I think that maybe we don't feel worse, but it's a different set of emotions that we get. Because I know that for me, when I've been in burnout, before I was diagnosed with autism, I was getting diagnosed with depression, because I wasn't getting out of bed for, like, weeks at a time. Like, I got out of bed to use the bathroom and that was it. That was the only time I was leaving my bed. I didn't change my clothes. I didn't shower, you know. It was all the typical signs of depression. And I was like, okay, but, like, this is the 3rd round of antidepressants I've been through. I've been feeling like this for 2 years. I don't think it's depression. Turns out it was autistic burnout. So whereas for other people with burnout, like a neurotypical person with burnout, they could go on a week little break, you know, maybe a weekend away. Maybe they could just have a pamper day and then go shopping the next day and have the next day off to, like, hang on the couch, and then they're good to go again. And obviously, I'm not denying that neurotypical people can get really bad burnout too. Neurotypical people can get depressed and end up in the same situation. You know, it's not an experience that's exclusive to autistic people. It's just one that we share in a way that's different to how a lot of other people experience it, I think. So yeah, I feel like I've helped you out with like the most common terms that I personally didn't have any idea what was being spoken about when I first tried to join the community. If there's anything else that you've seen floating around and you want to know what it means, drop it down below. And if I know what it means, I'll tell you. Hopefully if I don't know what it means, someone else will know and let you know. It can be such a roadblock to gain access to a community or a support system or whatever else when you don't know the language to use. And it's so easy to get dog-piled for saying the wrong thing, unintentionally offending people and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully this will help someone out, help educate someone, I don't know. But whoever you are and wherever you are, I hope you're having a lovely morning, evening, afternoon, day, week, month, year, and I'll see you again in a few days.